Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan, MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 11th of December 2024. Sorry, it is a lot later today. I am still on recovery mode, getting over an illness. And actually, last night, as a little bit of a break, I had a very late night. Instead of reporting on tanks blowing up, sometimes I get on World of Tanks on the PlayStation and then blow up some tanks myself. That's how I relax, apparently. So a bit of a late night and struggling today. Right, personnel losses for the Russians, and all the caveats apply to these general staff figures from the Ukrainian general staff. You can find them in the description to the video below. 1,400 personnel loss is a high number. Really meaningful losses the Russians are taking on a daily basis. 2 tanks, obviously very low number there. 20 armoured personnel vehicles, that's right up from where it was yesterday. 3 artillery systems is, exceedingly low. We very rarely see that few artillery systems taken out. 36 vehicles and fuel tanks and 4 pieces of special equipment. So real up and down list there, but essentially personnel losses are still staggering for the Russians. I think they're losing quite a lot up in the Kursk area, and of course, where they are succeeding in the Donetsk region, they are doing that at a huge cost to their own troops. Now, Andrew Perpetua's figures from yesterday, he had 162 personnel caught on camera perishing, which is obviously sad. These are human beings, but as far as the statistics concerned, that's a high number for him, suggesting that those numbers are still, those losses are still fairly staggering. As far as the equipment goes, just a few more, probably 1.5 times the losses. The Russians are losing 1.5 times the Ukrainian losses. That's the ratio then. In terms of combat asset losses, just a few more for the Russians than the Ukrainians. Fairly similar numbers though, which is not what the Ukrainians want, but possibly shows that they are still doing a lot of activity up in the Kursk region. There's quite a bit of footage. In fact, reporting from Ukraine did a video specifically on the Kursk region this morning. It's worth looking at. Still a lot of activity as the Russians are trying to attack Malaya, Loknya from 2 different directions. Anyway, we have 2 UGVs. I showed you a machine gun UGV yesterday and was wondering how that was used. Well, actually one caught on camera being destroyed by a drone drop bomb, and another UGV hit by an FPV drone. Artillery, a few Western bits of artillery and a Soviet one there, all damaged. Infantry fighting vehicles, all BMPs today. Only 3 on the list, 1 destroyed. A couple of AFVs, nondescript AFVs there then. In terms of the APCs, MRAPs and infantry mobility vehicles, almost all of them destroyed, abandoned, or indeed in one, in a Humvee's case, captured. All of that is Western provided equipment. So VAB abandoned is a French piece of FV-103 Spartan, UK. BAT UMG is an American, although it could be the base for the German FFG provided, well, MRAP or different variants. So the Americans are providing the base kind of vehicle that the Germans then upgrade and provide that themselves. So I don't know which one that would be. Kozak, Max Pro, Kozak, Humvee, Novator, Humvee, Kozak 7, all Western or indigenously built equipment there, but nothing too significant on the list. Few civilian vehicles as well. For the Russians, we see a helicopter on the list. That is a Mi-8. I've not seen that. Yes, no, I have. Of course, I did show you it was damaged, and that's one that apparently had some crew who were killed on board. That was taken out by the USV machine gun. That's the unmanned sea vehicle that had both machine gun and I think it had man pads on top as well, except they're not man portable, they're USV portable. Okay, so helicopter damage there, patrol boats damaged as well from that same USV interaction in the Crimea Bridge area. A couple of bits of artillery there, some tanks, including 2 destroyed T-90Ms. That's good. That's the best Russian tank. 2 of those destroyed is good. Abandoned and hit by Nemesis drone, and then an unknown cause for the other one. Infantry fighting vehicles, about a dozen there, and all but 1 destroyed or abandoned. So that's excellent news for the Ukrainians. Really good ratio. BMPs and BTRs there. A couple of AFVs, a couple of MTLB, APCs, armoured, lots of letters here, armoured personnel carriers. And then you've got trucks, a lot of ATVs today, 7 ATVs, almost all undestroyed. Desert Cross 1000-3. In fact, there are some more of those being delivered to the Kursk region, I think, according to video evidence, and then quite a number of civilian vehicles thrown in too. So there's quite a bit of equipment on this list. Not too much more in terms of combat assets than the Ukrainians, but yeah, some interesting entries there. Okay, moving on, we have, oops, that was not quite how it was supposed to be. So this is one. Kyiv Independent reports that Russia continues to suffer record losses in December. And this is Zelensky saying that. So Russian forces have incurred record high casualties in manpower during hostilities in both November and December. Zelensky said in a meeting with Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky. That is borne out by the General Staff figures. Of course, question is how accurate are those figures, but I think we're in a pretty good position to say that the trends are certainly pretty accurate, and I think we've got good justification for believing them in the main. Some staggeringly high losses over November and December for the Russians. But they are, of course, making more ground than they ever have done before, and there's almost certainly a meaningful correlation there, a causation involved in take more ground, take more losses. Okay, media identifies over 82,000 Russian soldiers killed in Ukraine. So this is the BBC Russia and Mediazona investigation into those announced on social media and whatnot, obituaries. They have to be absolutely connected to the war, without any doubt. It's quite a high bar in order to qualify for this statistic, and it also doesn't include LPR and DPR. So the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republic armies or militias that are now being drawn into the Russian army are not included here. So all the people who were fighting since 2022 from those regions are not included. And yeah, it's a very conservative estimate. So at least your benchmark minimum is 82,000. 82,050 people have definitely died. Russians have definitely died in the war, and it could be twice that. You don't know how conservative that is, but those are pretty staggering numbers when you think of how many died in the Afghanistan conflict. Was it 15,000 in Afghanistan? And that was too much for the Russian population at the time. Well, times have changed, and there's an iron grip over the information spaces. Those who have been much more anti-war have either left or been locked up, and you've got a very pliant population, and that they have not really kicked up too much of a fuss, all things considered, given that probably a good 100,000 people have died in the war. It's absolutely staggering. Now, the Kursk region, an attempt by the Russians to break through to the positions of the 225th Assault Battalion of the Armed Forces of Ukraine in a column of Tiger armoured vehicles, didn't work out, and here's the result. I can't play you this video, but you've got 3 vehicles here at least that are just absolutely hammered and all on fire, like you can see. 225th, as I keep saying, I've got that badge just here to my right somewhere. Yay, that's the badge that you see in the top right of there. Thanks to Pierre for giving me that the other day. Okay, so good stuff there. In Kursk, the Russians are still having quite an issue. A battery of 3 previously undocumented destroyed Russian 2S-19 Mr. S self-propelled guns, presumably in the Perpetua district of Ukraine. I'm showing you this because quite often we don't see the visual evidence for artillery that we see for the other pieces of equipment, because they're generally held further back from the contact zone, and it's that contact line area where but people like Andrew Perpetua and his teams and other OSINT people are looking at satellite imagery. You generally aren't going to pay for satellite imagery that is further back, so at 20 kilometers back from the front line, when you're looking for blown up bits of equipment. But that's where your artillery is going to be be positioned. 15 kilometers, 20 kilometers back. And occasionally you get imagery like this. Okay, well, here's an entire battery of 3 destroyed pieces of equipment that would have been claimed by the Ukrainian General Staff, but won't have ended up on something like Andrew Perpetua's lists, although it will now, undoubtedly. Right, so there was that. What else? Ukrainian artillerymen have set a world record for firing. This is brilliant, and I just hope that they can get an absolute ton of these volcano guided projectiles. So they've set a world record for firing range, with conventional field artillery hitting a target at a distance of 70 kilometers. Now, we have heard that in principle volcanoes can hit targets at 70 kilometers. But to actually have that happen, and here the picture looks like a Panzerhaubitze 2000. I don't know. Oh, no. The fire was conducted from a Polish Crab with a high-precision volcano-guided projectile. Maybe that is a Crab, and I'm reading that. So the AHS Crab is a Polish-South Korean co-design, although I think it uses the same hull, or is it turret, as the AS-90? Anyway, probably the same hull. Something like that. So that is fantastic news for the Ukrainians. How many volcanoes do they have? Those are going to be expensive bits of kit, right? So you're paying a lot of money in order to be able to hit something at 70 kilometers. But to be able to hit with a precision guided munition a target at 70 kilometers with artillery is exceptionally useful. Really, really is. Really adds to what you can do. Now, here we have a new edition of Drone Wars. So this is an FPV, a Ukrainian FPV drone taking out a Russian fiber optic controlled drone in just smashing into it. First ever footage shows a Ukrainian UAV destroying its Russian unjammable fiber optic counterpart, thwarting an attack on Ukrainian equipment. I mean, they need to do this an awful lot. These Russian fiber optic drones are really causing a problem for the Ukrainians. So there we have a bit of drone on drone action. Now here we have a really significant explosion. Apparently 2 bridges have been destroyed in the Chernihiv region by Russians with these drones. So the drone landing under the bridge, and then my goodness, that bridge goes. It's a really massive explosion, totally takes out the bridge. So goodness knows what's loaded onto that. I presume hexacopter or something. No further details, says Tim White. I cannot verify when the video was taken, but I believe it to be genuine and recent. So that's going to be a thorn in the side of the Ukrainians there. Now, Andrew Perpetua is saying here, Elmo is suppressing, so Elon Musk is suppressing this post of Russian terrorism. Do not let him suppress news like this. Retweet the post, the one by Gick, not this one, and write a comment. Force the algorithm to accept reality against its will. So this is Antonivka in Kherson. Russian drone operators target a fire engine, apparently responding to a fire at or close to school number 21. So you've got a fire at a school, and Russian drone operators are aiming at the fire engine. It's absolutely staggering, absolutely shocking. The Russians disgust me, don't they? Right. Language learner who I interviewed really early on in my videos. I need to reach out to him again, actually. A phenomenal thread explaining the sheer cost of the modern Russian offensive playbook. Russia can't run out of resources. People have said they're limited for years. They fight QED, they will never run out. Please show me where Russia is producing 600 tanks and 1,200 new APCs a year. So, this is Vladimir Dachenko, a Battle of Pokrovsk. The Battle of Pokrovsk became the biggest battle of this war, but it also became one of the largest battles in history in terms of the number of armoured vehicles lost. And on this infographic, it says losses of Russian per square kilometre of the occupied territory for the last 13 months. 0.6 tanks per square kilometre, 1.3 armoured vehicles per square kilometre, and 154 soldiers per square kilometre. So for every square kilometre, they are losing 154 people. That's losses in the Russian army of 580 tanks, 1,220 armoured vehicles, 90 plus pieces of artillery, and 150,000 soldiers. Russia's losses under the Pokrovsk area are close to the number of the 3 armies of the Western General Military District as of 2022. The biggest battles by the number of armoured losses Alamein, Battle of Brody, Gulf War, Battle of Stalingrad, Battle of Kursk, and you've got a significant number here in Pokrovsk. Quite incredible. Anyway, moving on. So in the battles near Pokrovsk, Russian losses are close to the number of the entire Western Military District of the Russian Federation as of 2022, which was being prepared for war with NATO, and this is about 60% of the forces with which Russia planned to seize Ukraine in 3 days in 2022. In October 2023, Russia defined the offensive in Pokrovsk as the main axis of its offensive campaign. Obviously, Putin is focused on the goal of completely capturing the Donetsk region as the highest priority goal in the coming years, but the offensive led to colossal losses. During the last few weeks of the offensive, Russian losses were estimated at 13,000 soldiers. In February 2024, Russian losses were estimated at 47,000 soldiers killed and wounded. In the future, the dynamics of battles in this direction did not decrease. Under this dynamic, Russia's total losses for 13 months of fighting in the Pokrovsk direction amount to about 150,000 soldiers killed and wounded. This is more than Russia's losses in the battles for Bakhmut, 100,000. And only the visually confirmed losses of the Russian army during the 13 months of fighting in the Pokrovsk region amount to 1,800 units of armor. The real losses are even greater. So remember, these are just visually confirmed losses. Wow. Absolutely staggering. The real losses are even greater. How much is that? And he's using the Nalcio confirmed data for regional confirmed data. So I've often dipped into Nalcio's figures in Pokrovsk. So for example, he looks at a different region and then adds on the latest one. So in Pokrovsk, as of the 15th of November, he hasn't done one for almost a month now in Pokrovsk. But the last time he added like 83 Russian losses and 39 Ukrainian losses in terms of armor. But anyway, we'll go back to this thread. So where were we? Goodness knows, right back here. The number of Russian casualties in the Battle of Pokrovsk is close to the number of the Western Military District as of 2022, which included 3 armies, the 1st Tank Army, the 6th and 20th General Armies. The Western Military District of the Russian Federation was supposed to oppose the armed forces of NATO on the territory of Europe, and the 1st Tank Army was Putin's greatest pride, the largest tank army in the world. Imagine if some general proposed an offensive plan that involved the loss of 3 armies in the battles for 2 small cities with a total population of 95,000 before the war. That's Avdiivka and Pokrovsk. Any country would recognize this as madness. Russia lost more tanks at Pokrovsk than any country in Europe has in its army. Just remember this. So when people say Russia are winning, Russia this is all terrible for Ukraine. Look at what's happened, and these are visually confirmed losses, right? Just look at what's actually happened in terms of those Russian losses. Russia lost more tanks at Pokrovsk than any country in Europe has in its army, or more soldiers than the entire armed forces of the United Kingdom. Remember this when you read the news about the battles for a small town in eastern Ukraine. Perhaps in the future, historians will have to revise the term Pyrrhic victory and replace it with Putin's offensive. But it does not seem that Putin and his generals are capable of abandoning the continuation of the offensive on Pokrovsk, no matter what the cost to the Russian army. It's hard to believe, but the Russian losses of armoured vehicles at Pokrovsk are greater than the losses of the German army in the Battle of Stalingrad. The Battle of Pokrovsk may become one of the largest offensives in history in terms of the number of armoured vehicles lost. For every kilometre of occupied territory in this direction, Russia loses 10 to 15 times more resources than in all directions. And this testifies to Putin's mad obsession to show everyone that the Russian army does not stop but continues to advance. Probably in the coming months, no less brutal battles and frontal attacks by the Russian army await us. These months will be the culmination of the Pokrovsk offensive, an offensive in which Russia will lose 3 armies to assert the ambitions of its dictator. And he goes on to thank Nalcio and other OSINT researchers for the data there. Absolutely incredible, isn't it? And we forget, in our micro obsession of different things going on in this field or there, or in our slightly zoomed out impression of what's going on with Russia taking all these fields and villages and towns, you forget that this comes at an incredible cost to the Russians. That is just insane. Now, moving to Syria, just to show you this picture. These are 6 vintage Osa 2 class missile boats. The Israeli strike on Latakia paid to an awful lot of maritime capability, quite old school capability for the Syrian army. They also destroyed air bases full of Soviet era airplanes, MiG-29s, and I think some Sukhois as well. Right. Moving on to distant strikes. So, air defense in Dnipropetrovsk region shot down 2 missiles this morning. Type of weapon was not specified, and Ukraine has not yet released details of the total overnight attack. So, I don't think we had details yesterday either. This could be incredible that 2 nights in a row the Russians have been unable to, or have not, given wide scale drone waves attacks into Ukraine. It's quite marked, I think. Interesting. Now, yesterday there were some pretty horrific scenes coming out of Zaporizhia, has to be said. So Putin, as it says, Putin in his nation of barbarian savages, says Jay in Kyiv, just needed to bathe some Silicon Valley billionaires in a few years of basic contrarian Russian disinformation in order to get them to whitewash his global terror binge. And now the fact that Russia is targeting Ukraine's hospitals with ballistic missiles on a daily basis is all just a big joke, even something for these billionaires to laugh about over sushi. The city of Zaporizhia, Russians fired several ballistic missiles onto this hospital at peak hours, so this clinic. At least 14 victims, mostly women. Tim White later says here, the death toll from the massacre in Zaporizhia has risen to 7. Rescuers continue to gently cut through metal and rubble to reach victims still trapped after the missile attack by Russia. 5 of the rescue remain in hospital. 1 man is critical. I think someone was brought back to life, actually, that was thought dead, so that's really good news there. Just pretty horrific in Zaporizhia yesterday. Okay, moving on. Last night, some really good news for the Ukrainians. So a Bryansk oil depot was hit with some pretty impressive footage coming from there. So there's a strike on oil depot of Transneft in Bryansk. Satellite imagery shows it's not the first time that the Transneft oil depot has organised a bomb fire, so it has been hit previously. But my goodness, there were some big flames coming from there. Transneft refinery in Bryansk, Russia is on fire. Locals backed by CCTV footage report explosions. It's not a small fire or explosion, says Tendar. And indeed, PS01 says Ukraine struck that oil depot in Bryansk. The depot is a filling point of the Druzhba oil pipeline, the main function of which is the reception, storage, distribution and shipment of diesel fuel to tankers and railway transport. It is actively used to supply the Russian occupation army. So it might have a tangible effect on the Russian armed forces and their ability to move and also to warm themselves in the winter as they keep their engines on, or at least that was what happened. If you remember in 2022, and they're having loads of logistics issues, and that was and you had these big long columns, like that 60-kilometer long column north of Kyiv, and part of the problem for them was that it was there were freezing temperatures and they had to keep their engines on, which then used up fuel, just to keep themselves warm, and they were having issues with getting fuel to those columns. Also, if you keep, it's slightly different with a column, where a column is, but in terms of keeping engines on at night, it gives you heat signature for thermal optics as well, so it's not great. Now, it wasn't just Bryansk, and remember I was saying, look, surely we're going to see some big strikes going on fairly soon, because the Ukrainians supposedly are making things at scale, like the Perpetua drone missile, like the the Peklo drone missile as well. All these different munitions that they're supposed to be making at scale, and we've seen imagery of some of these built, and you're thinking, when are they going to be used? Well, last night it appears that there were 2 places that there were munitions used. One here, Bryansk, and here at Taganrog, which is in Rostov Oblast. It was attacked by drone missiles. According to Russian sources, eyewitnesses claim that at 4:18 in the morning, at least 10 explosions were heard over Taganrog, and the city's missile warning sign was turned on. However, many people received notifications of the air raid warning on their phones with a significant delay, from 40 minutes to 3 hours. Local residents claim that the military plant's Taganrog Aviation Scientific and Technical Complex, named after GM Beriev, was attacked. Fire trucks were heading in this direction, and later the area of damage was cordoned off by police. The video itself was filmed near the parking lot of the aircraft repair plant in Tsiolkovsky Street. So filmed over the fence there. War Translated says that this is the 325th aviation repair plant being hit by missiles. Authorities reported 14 burned vehicles. I don't know if they are planes or trucks or whatever in the parking lot, but damage is unclear. Locals say shelters were locked, sirens sounded after the strikes, and text alerts came 40 minutes post-explosions, as we heard from PS01. So, two potentially significant strikes last night by the Ukrainians, which is kind of what you want to see. You want to see this happening on a daily basis, nightly basis, every night from now until January the 20th. You want the Russians to be on their knees by January the 20th. Yeah, the Ukrainians may feel like they're on their knees in terms of what's going on in the southern southern Donetsk area, given that there's this acceleration, as you can see on the screen at the moment, an acceleration of a territory gained by the Russians, going down from a low in June of 2024, July, August, September, October, November, just, huge amounts, relatively large amounts of territory being taken. Russian forces captured 702 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory in November, almost 5 times more than all gains earlier in 2023, per the Ukrainian war infographics. In 2024, they seized 2,800 square kilometers and now control 18% of Ukraine, including Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk. But Russia's losses have also increased proportionally, and this is the point I was making earlier. As again, Vladimir Dechenko says, Russia is suffering more and more losses, trying to look like the side that is winning. The dynamics of Russian losses indicate the price of the Russian offensive. And so let's look at his short thread here. Russia has had to go to a colossal increase in its losses in order to continue to look like it's the winning side. If in 2022 Russian losses amounted to about 200 soldiers per day, killed and wounded, in 2023 about 500, then in 2024 Russia reached the mark of 1,000 and 1,500 soldiers per day. Russian losses increased 10 times compared to the first months of the war. Given the hostilities are taking place in fairly limited territories, the overall losses of the Russians are unprecedented. Russia's losses in relation to the area of captured territories are growing exponentially, and so far only the war in Korea has a higher ratio of losses per area of captured territories. And any other country would define such losses as unacceptable in relation to the results obtained, but Russia never calculated the price of victory. In fact, there have been no significant expansion of Russian zone of control over the past 2 years. We are still in the zone of static positional battle of attrition, and the winner in such a struggle is usually the one who has a better value, the number of resources times the efficiency. This is costing the Russians a lot. What will the outcome be of this? Will it be a Pyrrhic victory where they completely exhaust themselves? Ukraine may have something in reserve. They may not be putting them to the contact line because they want to keep them for this time when the Russians completely culminate, or will the Russians not culminate and just feed the meat grinder incessantly? But they appear to be struggling to do so, not covering their losses, but then apparently neither are Ukraine covering their losses. Okay, so going on to other bits and pieces more generally here. So Ukraine has enough funds and weapons to resist until at least mid-2025, even if US aid stops, says Ukrainian Finance Minister Serhiy Marchenko in an interview with El País. So that's good news that they're in at the moment, the worry for Ukraine are boots on the ground. That's what they need desperately, which is why you're hearing more and more talk of foreign soldiers. Like, for example, France has talked about this with Macron again, European soldiers on the ground in Ukraine in some way. Euromaidan Press report that Russian troops are intensifying human wave attacks in Chasiv Yar, aiming to break through Ukrainian defences there. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces continue to hold strong near Toretsk, causing significant Russian casualties, with 100 soldiers lost in a day there. And of course, then you go up to Kursk. The report from Ukraine ran a video today on that frontline report there. Putin removes the Kursk governor after military setbacks there. I reported on that the other day. In a single month, Ukrainian forces have neutralized 37 mechanized Russian assault attempts just near Malaya Lochnia, transforming predicted attack routes into killing zones, using mines and artillery really effectively. At the same time, it's worth noting that Atesh have tracked, so these are the partisan groups, have tracked Chinese buggies heading to Kursk. A convoy of Desert Cross 1000-3 vehicles was spotted on the M4 highway between Rostov and Voronezh. Russia uses these buggies for recon, raids and evacuation. Their build-up may indicate preparations for sabotage ops. That's really unfortunate. These are, I guess, vehicles that China can get away with claiming are not combat vehicles, but they are used as combat vehicles. And so, are Russia helping Ukraine with lethal weaponry? I think it's a semantic distinction. Kyiv Independent reports that Russia has reduced its barge barriers protecting the Crimean Bridge by half in a month. The number of barges Russia has deployed in the Kerch Strait to protect the illegal Crimean Bridge against Ukrainian maritime drones has halved in a month, according to the Centre of Journalistic Investigations from December the 10th there. I don't know what that means, really. I don't know why they would do that. And whether that means the Crimean Bridge is now more susceptible to attack, I don't know. Putin's regime may be closer to a Soviet collapse than we think. Russia's resurrected military-industrial complex is cannibalizing the rest of the economy, says the Daily Telegraph. Putin's strategic victory in Ukraine is less inevitable now after the Assad regime has collapsed like a house of cards, is a conclusion there. So the pressure, although there will be a little bit of a short-term gain for Russia in Ukraine as they get some redeployed troops and equipment from Syria, Syria will hurt. Yes, it's costing them, Syria, but the return on investment, one would argue, outweighs that cost. Syria enables Russian influence operations in Africa. Syria enables influence operations throughout the Mediterranean, and therefore Suez Canal, Red Sea, out into the Indian Ocean or out through the Mediterranean to the Atlantic Ocean. Syria is incredibly important for Russia, and that's why they were willing to spend as much as some people are saying 3 million a day there. They've lost, some calculations, 543 troops in Syria, which is much more than they have claimed, according to investigations. But they were doing that because you would assume they were getting that return on investment, and now they're not. So Russian blogger Kashavarova claims that Russian militants are still stranded in Syria and Africa with Russian bases blocked. While the status remains unconfirmed, she suggests losing bases in Syria would doom all projects in Africa to failure. So these are Russian, pro-Russian nationalist bloggers saying it's not good. Our bases are completely surrounded. Another one, Khmer Mim, is encircled by militants, claims that we are staying or leaving our disinformation. If we leave Syria, what happens to the purpose of the Ministry of Defence's African Corps? Losing Syria, including it as a transport hub, would mean losing access to Africa. Russia's withdrawal from Syria would give Turkey an opportunity to become a player in the European energy market by constructing a pipeline to Europe. Russian bases could also be used to pressure Russia into peace on terms favourable to Ukraine and the US. Many in the corridors of power saying that Syria has become a bargaining chip between global powers. It might indeed be a trade-off, but without Russia's involvement, there seem to be no visible benefits for Russia. Besides, how can one engage in such trade-offs and agreements with those who have never honoured international treaties or obligations? They have disregarded all agreements, including the Minsk ones, says a Russian. Absolutely unbelievable. So it's not looking good for the Russians concerning Syria and the knock-on effects. Christopher Miller from the Financial Times says Russia is holding on to the main naval and air base it uses as staging points for the Mediterranean and Africa, even as it pulls its forces back from smaller outposts in Syria following the overthrow of its ally Bashar al-Assad. Euromaidan Press reports on Zelensky here, saying a warning that Russian leader Putin would seek retaliation for the fall of Assad's regime in Syria. He emphasized the need for international unity to counter Russian aggression and protect global security. There's an awful lot riding on Trump coming in January. It's so unknown. He's so unpredictable. That might be a good thing, but I just don't think he's got his head in a globalist agenda. I think he's got an isolationist kind of somewhat inclined to being anti-Ukraine, given the people surrounding him. Some of the people surrounding him. Some of the people are more hawkish, like Mike Waltz. But I don't know whether the influence of Mike Waltz and maybe Keith Kellogg will be enough to overcome the influence of Donald Trump Jr., Elon Musk, all of, Tucker Carlson, all of the rest of the people, just a whole suite of people, David Sachs, etc., all of the people that are funding the Trump administration effectively are the ones who are anti-Ukraine. So I don't know. I'm so up and down. Right. Max74 reports from the Washington Post, Ukraine helped the Syrian opposition shortly before the offensive in Syria. So about 4 to 5 weeks ago, Ukraine sent 20 drone operators and about 150 first-person view drones to Idlib. Ukraine's goal was to carry out a covert blow to Russian operations abroad. Wow. So if that's true, my goodness, some clever play from Ukraine here, because it appears that Syria was that important and was that fragile, so important for Russia. Anyone, says Tendar, with experience of the Ukrainian war, who saw the drone videos of Syrian rebels, especially of the HTS, so they're the main group who have liberated most of the territory recently, understood that they got help from Ukraine. Both tactics and technology clearly resembled Ukrainian war tactics. The HTS takeover of Aleppo was in many ways a replication of Ukraine's offensive into Kursk. The Kuerres airbase east of Aleppo, which in September was still manned by Russians, was attacked by Ukrainian intelligence units. Same goes with Africa, where Ukrainians are probably supporting Tuaregs against Wagner units in places like Mali. And we've seen the Ukrainians evident in Sudan as well, against the Russians there. So Ukraine is waging a global war against Russia with outstanding success, and it's painful thorn in Russia's side. I wonder whether history books will look back on what's been going on in Africa and places and show that the Ukrainians have had a much bigger hand, and maybe indeed in Syria, than we had previously imagined. It's going to be fascinating to find out. Right, and finally, here's a photograph of the exploding incendiary device that was due to be on a DHL airplane as it was flying. So photographs of the fire caused by a suspected Russian incendiary device at a DHL facility in Birmingham in July have backed up intelligence assessments that the blast was strong enough to have brought down a cargo plane. And that's a report in The Guardian. Again, what do we do about this? This is Russia with a hybrid war on the UK. That is an act of war. Do we just go, no, Russia? Crazy. And I know the UK is being really strong on Russia, but it's these grey areas that I think we allow Russia to push the envelope. They should be absolutely... I mean, what do we do? Why the frick are these people on the UN Security Council? Get them the hell off the UN Security Council. It's disgusting. Anyway, rant over. Very short one, that one. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your support. I'm going to try and get some Christmas decorations. I'm wearing my Christmas jumper. Get some decorations up, Pearce. So stop playing World of Tanks. Do something useful. Speak soon. Toodle pips.